They thought they were targeting just another small-town blacksmith shop along Oregon's rugged coastline. The Steel Serpents MC saw Riverport as their perfect opportunity to establish control over the Pacific shipping routes, starting with a quiet industrial district and an aging blacksmith working alone at his forge. What began as simple extortion would expose an international weapons trafficking network spanning 3 continents, leading to the largest organized crime takedown in Pacific Northwest history. The Steel Serpents didn't realize that James Davidson wasn't just any blacksmith. He was a Force Recon Marine whose custom forge crafted classified tactical equipment for America's most elite military units. His workshop, appearing to be a modest local business, was actually a highly secure facility with military-grade surveillance and a direct line to federal agencies. But instead of shutting down their operation immediately, Davidson saw an opportunity to dismantle something much bigger. Using his forge as bait, he would methodically expose an entire criminal empire, proving that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the blade, it's the anvil used to shape it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn fog rolled thick off the Pacific, shrouding Riverport's industrial district in a heavy gray blanket. James Davidson stood at his forge, the orange glow of heated metal piercing the gloom. His calloused hands moved with practiced precision as he shaped a piece of high-carbon steel, each strike of his hammer echoing through the workshop. 20 years of military service had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming. The motorcycles had passed by his shop 6 times in the last hour. Their riders, wearing Steel Serpents patches, weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. James continued working, appearing focused solely on his craft, while his trained eye caught every detail. 3 bikes, 5 men, heavily armed despite Oregon's concealed carry laws. They were marking territory, establishing patterns, preparing for something. Behind the traditional blacksmith's equipment that filled the front of his shop, hidden cameras fed real-time footage to a secure room. On the monitors, facial recognition software quietly identified the bikers, building profiles and tracking movements. James had installed the system 3 years ago, when he'd received his first classified contract to produce specialized tactical equipment for military special operations units. The ping of hammer on steel masked the sound of his secure phone vibrating. James checked the message. Facial match confirmed. Marcus Viper Reed, Steel Serpents MC, known connections to international weapons trafficking. High priority FBI target. James set down his hammer, moving to a workbench where an unfinished blade lay cooling. The metal's surface bore the distinctive pattern of Damascus steel, a technique he'd perfected during his years of service. To most, it looked like decorative smithing. To trained eyes, it was a signature as distinctive as fingerprints, marking the blade as part of a classified series designed for elite military units. The sound of motorcycles grew louder again. This time, 2 of the bikes pulled into his parking lot. James activated the workshop's recording systems with a subtle hand gesture, then returned to his work. The heavy metal door swung open, bringing with it the smell of leather and exhaust. "Nice setup you got here, old-timer." The voice carried the false friendliness of practiced intimidation. James looked up to see a tall man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck. Viper himself, according to the intelligence briefing now scrolling across a hidden monitor. James set down his hammer carefully, years of training hidden behind the deliberate movements of a craftsman. "Help you with something?" Viper moved through the workshop, running his fingers along tools and finished pieces. His companion, a heavily muscled man with scars across his knuckles, positioned himself near the door. "Just admiring the craftsmanship," Viper said, picking up a completed blade. "You do good work. Traditional. Old school. The kind of business that deserves protection." James wiped his hands on his apron, watching as Viper tested the blade's edge with his thumb. "Protection from what?" "Oh, you know how it is these days." Viper set down the blade, moving closer to the forge. "Accidents happen, equipment breaks down, materials go missing, unless you have friends looking out for you." The second biker, Ray Snake Torres, according to the facial recognition display, shifted his weight, hand resting near his concealed weapon. James noted the movement while maintaining his appearance of casual attention. "I appreciate the offer," James said, turning back to his forge. "But I've got all the friends I need." Viper's friendly demeanor cracked slightly. "Don't think you understand, old man. Riverport's changing. Steel Serpents are expanding our business interests. Smart shop owners get with the program early." James lifted a glowing piece of metal from the forge, hammering it with measured strikes. Each impact sent sparks flying, reflecting off the moisture in the air. "I understand perfectly. You're offering to solve problems that don't exist yet. Problems that might start occurring if I don't pay for your friendship." "Sharp old man." Viper grinned, but his eyes had gone cold. "So what's it going to be?" James set down his hammer, finally turning to face them directly. Something in his stance made both bikers tense slightly, an unconscious recognition of contained danger. "I'm going to make this simple. You're going to walk out that door, get on your bikes, and find somewhere else to run your protection racket." Snake took a step forward, but Viper held up a hand. He studied James more carefully now, seeing past the craftsman's apron to the military bearing beneath. "You know, pride's a dangerous thing for a businessman. Makes people take stands they can't afford to take." "So is underestimating your targets," James replied evenly. "Makes people make mistakes they can't afford to make." The tension in the workshop grew thick as forge smoke. Viper's hand twitched toward his jacket, but something in James's unwavering gaze made him reconsider. "Think about it," he said finally. "We'll be back tomorrow. For your sake, hope you make the smart choice." The bikers left, engines roaring in what was meant to be an intimidating display. James waited until they were gone before activating his secure communication system. "Agent Chen? Yeah, it's Davidson. Remember that weapons trafficking ring you've been trying to crack? Think they just walked right into my shop." The early morning mist clung to Riverport's streets as James positioned surveillance equipment disguised as ordinary tools around his workshop. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from FBI agent Sarah Chen. "Confirmed surveillance shows Steel Serpents meeting with known arms dealers at the port. Your shop isn't their only target." James moved through his morning routine, mind working through contingencies as he fired up the forge. The heat pushed back the coastal chill, but his focus remained sharp. Through the workshop's front windows, he could see Beth Martinez opening her hardware store across the street. Her business would be another likely target. The Steel Serpents would want to control supply chains. The secure phone buzzed again. "Meeting in 20. Usual place." The dockside cafe sat 3 blocks from James's workshop, its worn exterior masking a sophisticated surveillance setup installed by federal agencies years ago. James entered to find Sheriff Tom Cooper already seated in a corner booth, coffee cooling in front of him. "They hit Mike's garage last night," Cooper said without preamble as James sat down. "Broke his windows, left a message about protection fees." The sheriff's weathered face showed the strain of watching his town slowly being infiltrated. "Mike's garage gives them access to transportation logistics," James noted, scanning the cafe while appearing to study the menu. "They're building infrastructure." Agent Chen arrived next, her casual clothes concealing both a weapon and a recording device. "We've identified 3 more Steel Serpents chapters moving into position along the coast," she reported quietly. "This isn't just about Riverport anymore. They're establishing a corridor." James shared what he'd learned from the previous day's encounter. "Viper's confident but not reckless. He's following orders, building something systematic. Intelligence suggests they're working with a larger organization," Chen confirmed. "The weapons they're trafficking aren't street-level hardware. We're talking military-grade equipment, some of it classified." Cooper leaned forward. "How are they getting access to that kind of weaponry?" "That's what we need to find out," Chen replied. "And James's shop might be our best chance. They'll see his metalworking expertise as an asset, try to force him to help modify weapons." The discussion was interrupted by James's phone vibrating, a text from Jenny at Beth's hardware store. "They're here." James stood smoothly. Show starting early today. Through the calf window, they could see 3 motorcycles parked outside Beth's store. Viper and Snake were visible through the shop windows, moving between shelves with deliberate menace. Let it play out, Chen advised. We need to document their pattern of intimidation. James watched as Beth stood her ground behind the counter, but he could see the fear she was fighting to hide. Jenny had positioned herself near the store's security cameras, ensuring everything was being recorded. They're spreading out, Cooper observed. Hit Mike's garage last night, Beth's store this morning. They'll work their way through the industrial district, building pressure. Creating a network of compromised businesses, James agreed. Each one forced to support their operation, provide cover for moving weapons. Through the window, they watched the confrontation at Beth's store end without violence. The bikers left, but their message had been delivered. Beth's hands were shaking as she locked the door behind them. We need to move carefully, Chen cautioned. These guys are connected to something bigger than we originally thought. Latest intel suggests they might be working with former military contractors, people who have access to restricted weapons and equipment. James's expression hardened. That explains their interest in my shop. They don't just want protection money. They need someone who can modify military hardware without raising flags. Which makes you the perfect bait, Cooper realized. Your legitimate business, your skill set. They'll try to force me to help them alter serial numbers, modify weapons, James confirmed. But first, they'll need to establish control, make examples of anyone who resists. Chen's phone buzzed with an update. Port Authority just reported unusual activity at Pier 17, containers being moved without proper documentation. They're setting up their supply chain, James said, using the port's legitimate business to mask weapons shipments. He stood, checking the time. I need to get back. Viper said they'd return today, make sure I'd made the smart choice. Remember, Chen cautioned, we need evidence of their entire operation. Let them think they're in control. James nodded, his mind already gaming out scenarios. They'll escalate gradually. First intimidation, then vandalism, finally violence. Each step designed to show their power, break down resistance. My deputies can't be everywhere, Cooper admitted, and some of them might already be compromised. That's what they're counting on, James replied. Isolation, fear, the feeling that there's no one to turn to for help. He smiled slightly. But they don't know about the network we've already built. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As James walked back to his workshop, he noted increased motorcycle traffic on the streets. The Steel Serpents were establishing presence, marking territory, but they weren't the only ones watching. Veterans he'd helped through his rehabilitation program were positioned throughout the district, observing and reporting. His secure phone buzzed one final time. A message from Mike at the garage. Got visitors again. They're asking about vehicle modifications, secure storage spaces. The pieces were falling into place. The Steel Serpents weren't just running a protection racket. They were building a complete infrastructure for weapons trafficking. Each business they targeted would serve a specific function: transportation, storage, modification, distribution. James entered his workshop, the familiar smell of hot metal and coal smoke greeting him. He began preparing his forge, knowing the day's real work would have nothing to do with blacksmithing. The Steel Serpents were coming, thinking they'd found the perfect piece for their operation. Instead, they'd walked into a trap that had been years in the making. Through his workshop window, he could see more motorcycles gathering. The Steel Serpents were preparing to show Riverport what happened to those who resisted. But James Davidson was preparing to show them something else. What happened when they targeted the wrong blacksmith? The afternoon sun struggled to pierce Riverport's marine layer as James activated his workshop's hidden security protocols. Behind the traditional blacksmith equipment, military-grade monitoring systems tracked movement throughout the industrial district. The Steel Serpents were expanding their presence, more bikes appearing every hour. A series of rapid knocks on the workshop's back door drew James's attention. Beth Martinez slipped inside, her face tight with worry. They're demanding we stock specific supplies. Industrial cutting tools, specialized metals, things that could be used for weapons modification. James led her to his secure room, hidden behind a false wall of traditional forging tools. Multiple screens showed surveillance feeds from throughout the district. "They're setting up a supply chain," he explained, pointing to footage of increased activity at various businesses. "Each shop they target serves a specific purpose. Mike's garage for transportation, my store for supplies." Beth connected the dots. "And your forge for modifications." "Exactly." James pulled up detailed profiles of known Steel Serpents members. But they made a critical mistake. They think they're the only ones who've been preparing. The secure phone buzzed. Agent Chen's message was brief. "Confirmation on weapons shipment. High-grade military hardware. Someone's supplying them from inside the system." James's expression hardened. During his force recon days, he'd seen similar operations. Criminal organizations working with corrupt military contractors. That's why he'd established his legitimate blacksmith business as cover for his classified work. Each piece of military equipment he crafted was meticulously documented, every modification tracked. The workshop's perimeter sensors triggered. Through the cameras, they watched Viper approach with 5 other Steel Serpents members. This time, they carried themselves with more obvious menace. "Beth, use the back exit. Tell Cooper it's starting." After Beth left, James returned to his forge, appearing focused on his work as the bikers entered. Viper moved with calculated confidence, while his men spread out through the workshop. "Time's up, old man," Viper announced. "You've had your chance to do this the easy way." James set down his hammer carefully. "Guess you'd better do what you came to do." Snake moved first, sweeping tools off a workbench with a crash. Another biker began overturning equipment, while a third approached the forge itself. "Careful with that," James warned as the biker reached for a heated piece of metal. "Temperature's around 1500 degrees. The biker jerked back, and James noted how Viper's eyes narrowed at the precise technical knowledge. He was testing, probing, looking for signs that James was more than just a simple blacksmith. "Nice setup you've got," Viper observed, examining a partly finished blade. "Quality work. Military grade, I'd say." "I work with what I know," James replied evenly. "That's what we're counting on." Viper set down the blade. "See, we've got some equipment that needs modification. Serial numbers, ballistic signatures, things like that. Someone with your skills could be valuable." James maintained his calm demeanor while his hidden systems recorded everything. "And if I refuse?" On cue, the sound of breaking glass came from outside. Through the workshop windows, they could see more Steel Serpents members attacking Beth's hardware store. "Accidents happen," Viper shrugged. "To businesses, to people. Riverport's changing. Smart folks change with it." James watched as Beth's windows shattered, while his surveillance systems captured every angle of the attack. "You've made your point." "Have I?" Viper moved closer. His fake friendliness dropped completely now. "Because I don't think you understand exactly what's happening here. We're not some local gang playing at being tough guys. We've got connections you can't imagine, backing you don't want to know about." "Actually," James said quietly, "I think I understand perfectly." Something in his tone made Viper pause. The biker leader studied him more carefully now, perhaps sensing that James's calm wasn't born of fear or resignation. "You've got until tomorrow," Viper announced finally. "Either you're with us, helping modify our equipment, or we turn this place into kindling. And remember, we know where everyone in Riverport lives. Lots of isolated roads between here and anywhere safe." After they left, James activated his secure communication system. "Agent Chen, they just confirmed weapon modification operations, and they're definitely working with someone inside military channels. The technical details Viper dropped weren't common knowledge." Through his monitors, James watched the Steel Serpents regroup outside. More bikes were arriving hourly, establishing a presence meant to overwhelm and intimidate. But they weren't the only ones gathering strength. Veterans from James's rehabilitation program had begun taking positions throughout the district, maintaining subtle surveillance. Mike's garage was quietly preparing secure storage areas that appeared compromised, but were actually monitored. Beth's hardware store, despite its broken windows, was now a hub of intelligence gathering. James returned to his forge, heating metal as he considered the next phase. The Steel Serpents thought they were breaking down resistance, forcing cooperation through intimidation. Instead, they were walking further into an elaborate trap. His secure phone buzzed with updates from Cooper. Port Authority reports more unauthorized container movements. They're getting ready to move significant hardware. Everything was accelerating. The Steel Serpents were establishing their infrastructure quickly, confident in their power and connections. They thought they'd found a vulnerable community, perfect for their operation. James began hammering the heated metal, each strike echoing through the workshop. The rhythmic sound masked the quiet hum of surveillance equipment, the subtle clicks of cameras documenting every movement in the district. Tomorrow they'd return expecting his surrender. Instead, they'd find the first threads of their operation beginning to unravel, pulled apart by the very people they thought they'd conquered. Dawn broke over Riverport's port district as James reviewed surveillance footage in his secure room. The night had brought increased Steel Serpents activity, systematic intimidation of local businesses, coordinated movements suggesting military training. His monitors tracked motorcycle patrols, establishing overlapping coverage of key routes. Agent Chen's latest intelligence update confirmed his suspicions. Multiple shipments identified. Hardware matches missing inventory from Fort Carson. Inside source confirmed. A subtle alert indicated movement at Pier 17. James switched feeds to watch a cargo container being offloaded with unusual security. Steel Serpents members coordinating with dock workers who moved with military precision. Got eyes on the delivery, Mike radioed from his observation post near the port. They're using legitimate shipping manifests as cover. Documentation looks professional. James cross-referenced the container numbers with Port Authority records. The paperwork was perfect, too perfect. Someone with high-level access was clearing these shipments. His secure phone buzzed. Meeting, now, emergency. Cooper's message carried unusual urgency. The back room of Mike's garage had been converted into a makeshift command center. James found Cooper and Agent Chen already there, surrounded by surveillance photos and intelligence reports. We've got a problem, Chen began without preamble. Just identified their military connection. Marcus Reed, Viper. He's not just a gang leader. Former Special Forces, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago. But his unit commander? Still active, Cooper finished. Colonel Robert Hayes, Fort Carson Logistics Command. Controls military hardware inventory and shipping. James studied the documentation. They're not just stealing weapons. They're manipulating the system from inside, making legitimate shipments disappear into their network. Gets worse, Chen added. Hayes has connections to private military contractors, companies that handle classified equipment, including some of your customers. The implications were clear. The Steel Serpents weren't just targeting James's forge randomly. They had inside intelligence about his military contracts. A burst of static from the radio preceded Beth's voice. More bikes incoming, at least 20. They're surrounding the district. Through the garage's windows, they watched the Steel Serpents establish blockades at key intersections. Viper led a group toward James's workshop, their movements suggesting today wasn't about intimidation anymore. They're moving faster than expected, Chen observed. Something's pushed up their timeline. They know we're not what we seem, James replied. Viper's background. He recognized military indicators in my setup. They'll try to secure my forge before I can cause problems. Cooper's radio crackled with reports of increased gang activity throughout Riverport. The Steel Serpents were making their power play, attempting to lock down the entire industrial district. We're not ready, Chen protested. We don't have enough evidence to move on Hayes, to prove the military connection. Yes, we do. James activated his secure tablet, displaying surveillance footage from his workshop. Every conversation, every threat. Viper confirmed military-grade hardware, demonstrated insider knowledge. Combined with the port documentation, it's still circumstantial, Cooper warned. We need direct evidence linking Hayes to the weapons. The sound of motorcycles grew louder. Through the garage's security cameras, they watched Viper dismount, studying James's workshop with tactical precision. They'll search the place, James noted. Find the surveillance equipment. Unless... Chen's eyes narrowed. Unless that's exactly what we want. James smiled slightly. Let them think they've discovered our operation. Make them react. Cooper understood. They'll have to move their shipments, contact Hayes directly. And we'll be tracking every move, Chen finished. But it's risky. If they find your real setup... They won't, James assured her. The obvious surveillance is a cover for the actual system. Military grade, completely invisible unless you know exactly what to look for. The radio crackled again. Beth's voice carried controlled urgency. They're starting to move in, searching businesses systematically. Time to get into position, James stood. Cooper, get your trusted deputies ready. Chen, make sure your response teams understand. When this goes down, we'll only have one shot. As James walked back to his workshop, he noted how the Steel Serpents had positioned themselves. Professional coverage, interlocking fields of fire. Viper's military training was obvious now that James knew to look for it. Inside his forge, James began his morning routine. The simple act of heating metal and working it with hammer and anvil masked the sophisticated operation happening behind the scenes. Each strike echoed through the workshop, covering the subtle sounds of surveillance systems tracking every movement. Viper entered first, flanked by Snake and two new members who carried themselves with military bearing. Their eyes swept the workshop with practiced efficiency. Time's up, Viper announced. This place belongs to us now. Does it? James set down his hammer. Seems like a lot of effort for a simple blacksmith shop. Drop the act, Viper's voice hardened. We know what you really are. The question is, who are you working for? James noted the shift in approach. They weren't playing at being thugs anymore. This was a military operation now. Search it, Viper ordered. Find their surveillance setup. As the Steel Serpents began their search, James allowed himself a small smile. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Sometimes the best trap isn't the one that stays hidden. It's the one that lets the target think they've discovered it. The Steel Serpents methodically tore through James's workshop, their search revealing a carefully crafted FA-8 of surveillance equipment. Viper held up a discovered camera, his expression darkening as his men uncovered more devices. FBI? He studied James with new intensity. No, different tradecraft. Military intelligence, maybe? James maintained his position near the forge, every movement calculated. The hidden systems, the real surveillance network, continued recording as the gang discovered exactly what he wanted them to find. You know what this means. Viper crushed a monitoring device in his hand. Can't have federal eyes on our operation. Colonel Hayes was right about this place. The casual mention of Hayes' name confirmed everything. James watched as Snake discovered a hidden compartment containing apparent military documents, all carefully prepared disinformation. Look at this, Snake held up the files. He's got shipping manifests, military contract details. Viper's phone buzzed. His expression shifted as he read the message. Change of plans. We're moving everything tonight. Can't risk leaving the hardware exposed now that we know he's watching. More Steel Serpents arrived, their numbers swelling beyond simple intimidation. Through his legitimate security cameras, James tracked their deployment around the industrial district. They were locking down the entire area. Beth's voice came through his concealed earpiece. Multiple vehicles entering from the north, military transport trucks, unmarked. They're pulling out the whole operation, Agent Chen's voice added. Hayes must have authorized an emergency relocation. James studied Viper's body language, the tension, the controlled urgency. They thought they'd uncovered a federal surveillance operation. Now they'd have to move fast, make mistakes. Burn it, Viper ordered suddenly. Torch the whole place. Make it look like an electrical fire from these old forges. Snake grinned, pulling out incendiary devices that spoke of military origins. What about him? Take him. Hayes will want to know exactly who he's working for. As two Steel Serpents moved to grab James, The workshop's front windows exploded inward. Smoke grenades rolled across the floor, filling the space with dense cover. James moved with practiced efficiency, years of combat training taking over. In the chaos, Viper's radio crackled. Multiple police units approaching. FBI vehicles spotted on Highway 101. "Shut it down," Viper shouted. "Get the shipment moving, now." Through the smoke, James activated his emergency protocols. Throughout the industrial district, carefully positioned veterans from his rehabilitation program began reporting movements. "Convoy heading for Pier 17. Mike's voice came through clearly. "Military trucks, heavy escort." Agent Chen's response was immediate. "Do not engage. Let them think they're escaping. Davidson, you copy?" "Affirmative," James replied softly, watching the steel serpents retreat through his workshop's surveillance. "They found exactly what we wanted them to find. Now they'll lead us to everything else." The smoke began to clear, revealing the workshop's apparent destruction. But behind the damaged exterior, behind the planted surveillance they'd discovered, James's real operation remained intact. Every movement, every word had been captured by systems far more sophisticated than what the gang had found. Cooper's voice came through. "They're mobilizing everything. Every Steel Serpents chapter in 3 states is converging on Riverport." "Good," James began activating his secondary systems. "Let them come. The more hardware they try to move, the more evidence we collect." Beth reported from her observation post. "Colonel Hayes just arrived. Black SUV, military escort. They're heading for the port." "He's coming personally," Chen noted. The discovery of surveillance must have really spooked them. James moved through his workshop, assessing the staged damage. The Steel Serpents thought they'd found his operation, thought they'd forced him to shut down. Instead, they'd walked right into the next phase of his plan. "Davidson," Chen's voice carried warning. "Hayes being here changes things. He's got legitimate authority, can call in military support if he thinks he's dealing with a security breach." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," James replied, watching through his hidden cameras as more Steel Serpents arrived. "The bigger they make this, the more resources they commit. The more evidence we gather," Cooper finished. Outside, the sound of motorcycles grew to a roar as dozens of Steel Serpents established perimeter control. They were treating this like a military operation now, which meant Hayes was taking direct command. "All units hold position," Chen ordered. "Let them think they've got us running. Everything goes according to Davidson's plan." James stood in his workshop's doorway, watching the coordinated movement of gang members and military vehicles. They thought they'd discovered a federal surveillance operation. Instead, they'd fallen for an elaborate deception, one that would force them to expose their entire network. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator isn't to hide the trap, it's to let them think they've sprung it. Colonel Robert Hayes emerged from his black SUV with the confidence of a man accustomed to absolute authority. His civilian clothes couldn't hide his military bearing as he surveyed the industrial district, now locked down by Steel Serpents members acting with tactical precision. Through his remaining hidden cameras, James watched Hayes inspect the damaged workshop. The colonel's expression revealed nothing as he examined the planted surveillance equipment. "Status report," Hayes demanded, his voice carrying the same command presence that had led military operations. Viper straightened instinctively. "Workshop contains sophisticated surveillance setup, military grade. Davidson's got connections we didn't spot initially. Found documentation suggesting he's been monitoring shipments." "And Davidson? Wind got him out during the smokescreen, but we've got the whole district locked down. He won't get far." Hayes studied a damaged camera, his expertise showing as he examined the hardware. "This isn't civilian equipment, not FBI either." He turned to one of his escorts. "Get me secure communications with Fort Carson. We need to check if any special operations units are running unauthorized surveillance in the area." James's hidden microphones captured every word as Hayes began coordinating with military contacts. The colonel's presence was pushing the operation to a higher level, exactly as planned. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Beth's voice came through James's concealed earpiece. "Heavy trucks, military plates." Agent Chen added, They're calling in legitimate military assets. Hayes is using his authority to run interference. James watched through his network as more steel serpents arrived, their movements now clearly coordinated by Hayes's military expertise. The colonel was treating this as a full tactical operation. "Sir," one of Hayes's men approached with a satellite phone. "Fort Carson confirms no authorized operations in this area, but they're reporting similar surveillance discoveries at other supply points along the coast." Hayes's expression hardened. "They're mapping our entire network. How long has Davidson been watching us?" "Long enough," Viper replied. "Found documentation going back months, shipping manifests, transfer orders, everything." The colonel paced the workshop, his mind visibly working through scenarios. "Move everything. All shipments, all hardware. We're shutting down the entire West Coast pipeline tonight." Through his hidden surveillance, James captured Hayes issuing direct orders to military personnel, coordinating with Steel Serpent's chapters, and revealing the full scope of their operation. "Davidson." Agent Chen's voice was tight with excitement. "This is exactly what we needed. Hayes is exposing the entire network, using official channels to move illegal shipments." Cooper added, "Got reports of similar activity at every port from Seattle to San Diego. They're pulling out everything." James watched as Hayes established a command center in the workshop, transforming it into a military operations hub. The colonel's presence had changed everything, elevating a gang operation into a sophisticated military exercise. "Status update from Pier 17, Mike reported through the secure channel. "They're loading military hardware onto civilian vessels. Hayes is using his authority to clear port security." Hayes studied a map of the coast, marking points as he issued orders. "I want every shipment moved by dawn. Use military transport when possible. My clearance will handle any checkpoints. Civilian vehicles as backup. Steel Serpents providing escort." "Sir," Viper approached with new intelligence. "Our sources at the Port Authority spotted federal surveillance teams. They're watching the primary shipping channels. Use the secondary routes," Hayes ordered. "I'll have military patrol boats run interference. Make it look like a routine coastal security exercise." James's hidden systems captured every detail, building an irrefutable case as Hayes unknowingly exposed years of criminal infrastructure. "Chen," James whispered into his concealed microphone. "Are you getting all this?" "Every word," she confirmed. "Hayes is handing us the entire operation. Military assets, smuggling routes, corrupt officials, everything we need for a RICO case." The workshop became a hive of activity as Hayes coordinated the emergency evacuation of their weapons-trafficking network. Military trucks arrived, their manifests showing routine equipment transfers that would hide illegal shipments. "Sir," one of Hayes's military aides reported, "Fort Carson is asking questions about the unusual level of transport activity." "Tell them it's a surprise readiness exercise," Hayes ordered. "I'm evaluating our ability to rapidly relocate strategic assets. My authorization code should prevent any deeper inquiries." James's surveillance captured Hayes using official military systems to cover criminal operations. Each order, each authorization code, each abuse of authority was documented and transmitted to federal authorities. Through his network of observers, James tracked increasing activity throughout Riverport. The Steel Serpents were mobilizing every available member, their movements now displaying military precision under Hayes's command. "Davidson," Cooper's voice carried warning. "Hayes just ordered his military contacts to run background checks through official databases. They're going to figure out who you really are." "Let them look," James replied softly. "By the time they understand what's really happening, it'll be too late." Hayes stood in the center of the workshop, surrounded by maps and communications equipment, unknowingly performing his role in an operation far more sophisticated than the one he thought he'd discovered. "Find Davidson," he ordered. "Whatever he is, whoever he works for, he's seen too much. We're not just protecting a weapons pipeline anymore, we're covering up treason." The first rays of dawn illuminated Hayes's temporary command center as intelligence reports began flowing in. The colonel studied a dossier that had just arrived via secure military courier, his expression darkening with each page. "James Davidson," Hayes read aloud. "Force Recon Marine, Special Operations Experience. Multiple counterintelligence deployments. He looked up at Viper. We didn't just stumble onto some local blacksmith. We walked into a trap. Through hidden surveillance systems, James watched Hayes piece together his background. The colonel's growing realization was visible in his increasingly tense movements. "Sir," one of Hayes's military aides approached with a tablet. "Found something else. Davidson's forge isn't just a civilian operation. He holds classified contracts for tactical equipment manufacturing." Hayes's reaction confirmed everything. "Show me the contract numbers." "Some of them match our missing inventory, sir. The weapons we've been moving, Davidson's facility is certified to work on them legally." The colonel's secure phone buzzed. His face tightened as he read the message. "Fort Carson just flagged unusual access patterns in our shipping database. Someone's been documenting discrepancies in weapons inventories." From his concealed position in Mike's garage, James monitored the growing chaos through his surveillance network. Agent Chen's voice came through his earpiece. "Hayes is starting to understand. His military contacts are asking questions he can't answer. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north," Beth reported. "Military police units. Someone at Fort Carson must have connected the dots." Hayes paced the workshop, issuing rapid orders. "Accelerate everything. I want all shipments moved before those MPs start asking questions. Use emergency protocols. My authorization will override standard checks." Through his hidden cameras, James captured Hayes making a series of calls, each one exposing more of the criminal network as the colonel tried to contain the situation. "Found more, sir," Viper reported, holding up documents recovered from the workshop. "Davidson's been tracking our operation longer than we thought. These surveillance logs go back months." He wasn't just watching us, Hayes realized. He was building a case: military contacts, federal connections, documentary evidence. The colonel's training took over as he assessed the threat. This isn't just about weapons trafficking anymore. He's got enough to expose everything. James's surveillance recorded Hayes's growing desperation as the colonel began calling in favors, trying to contain the spreading investigation. "Colonel," a military aide interrupted, "Fort Carson's requesting direct confirmation of all weapons transfers from the past 6 months. They're citing irregularities in the documentation." "Stall them," Hayes ordered. "Use emergency protocols. Tell them we're conducting a classified readiness exercise." Agent Chen's voice carried controlled excitement. "He's digging himself deeper with every order, using military authority to cover criminal activity. It's all on record now." Through his network, James tracked increasing military and law enforcement presence around Riverport. Hayes's attempts to control the situation were actually drawing more attention. "Sir," Viper reported urgently, "just got word from our port contacts. Federal agents are checking container manifests. They know what to look for." Hayes studied the workshop's layout, his tactical mind working. Davidson set this up perfectly, used his legitimate operation as cover while he documented everything. The surveillance we found was just the surface. James watched as Hayes began to grasp the true scope of the operation. The colonel's military experience was now working against him, helping him understand just how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. "Pull everything," Hayes ordered suddenly. "Every shipment, every document, every piece of hardware. If Davidson's got the evidence I think he has, we're looking at treason charges." The workshop erupted into controlled chaos as Steel Serpent's members and Hayes's military contacts began executing emergency protocols. Each desperate attempt to cover their tracks only provided more evidence for James's surveillance. "Davidson," Cooper's voice warned. "Hayes is starting to move like a cornered animal. His military training makes him dangerous." "That's exactly what we need," James replied softly. "Let him think he's containing the situation. Every order he gives, every protocol he breaks, it all builds the case." Hayes stood in the center of the workshop, surrounded by evidence of his crimes, unknowingly performing for hidden cameras that documented his every move. "Find Davidson," the colonel ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Whatever it takes. He hasn't just exposed a weapons trafficking operation. He's uncovered a conspiracy that goes all the way to the Pentagon. If this gets out..." "Sir," A military aide interrupted with fresh intelligence. "You need to see this. Davidson's military record. There's more. His last deployment before retiring. He specialized in dismantling criminal networks operating inside military channels." Hayes's expression shifted from concern to understanding to barely controlled fury. "Son of a..." "He didn't just stumble onto our operation. He's been playing us from the start." Colonel Hayes transformed the workshop into a tactical operations center, military precision replacing the Steel Serpent's earlier chaos. Multiple screens displayed surveillance feeds from throughout Riverport as he coordinated a methodical manhunt for James Davidson. "I want every exit from the industrial district covered," Hayes ordered, marking points on a digital map. "Use our military contacts for roadblocks. Make it look like a routine security exercise. Steel Serpents provide secondary coverage but keep them subtle. Davidson knows what to look for." Through his hidden observation post at Mike's garage, James watched Hayes deploy his forces. The colonel's tactical expertise was evident in the systematic search pattern being established. "Multiple units moving into position," Beth reported through the secure channel. "Military police vehicles at major intersections, Steel Serpents covering back routes. They're establishing a complete cordon." Agent Chen's voice carried controlled urgency. "Hayes is using official military channels to coordinate the search. Every order exposes more of his network." James studied the deployment patterns through his surveillance network. Hayes was applying standard military search protocols, dividing Riverport into sectors for systematic coverage. "Sir," one of Hayes's aides approached with new intelligence. "Found more about Davidson's military record. His last 5 deployments were all deep cover operations, infiltrating criminal networks operating inside military infrastructure." Hayes's expression hardened. "He's not just gathering evidence. This entire setup, the forge, the contracts, everything, it's all been cover for a long-term operation." Through concealed microphones, James captured Hayes making a series of increasingly desperate calls to military contacts. Each conversation revealed more connections, more corrupt officials, more evidence for the federal case. "Additional vehicles approaching from the south," Mike reported. "Unmarked SUVs, military driving pattern. Looks like Hayes called in his special operations contacts." Cooper's voice carried warning. "These aren't just gang members anymore. Hayes is bringing in professional operators." The colonel established secure communications with his military teams, unknowingly providing James's surveillance with direct access to their tactical network. "Davidson's not just some retired Marine playing Blacksmith," Hayes briefed his operators. "He's run operations like this before, specialized in exposing corruption in military channels. Everything we're seeing, the surveillance, the documentation, the tactical positioning, it's all textbook counterintelligence." James watched through his network as Hayes's hunters moved through Riverport with professional precision. The colonel was deploying serious resources now, each team's movements revealing more about the scope of his criminal organization. "Sir," Viper reported urgently. "Port authorities asking questions about the increased military presence. They're requesting official documentation for all these roadblocks." "Use emergency protocols," Hayes ordered. "My authorization codes will override local concerns. Tell them it's a classified security operation." Agent Chen's voice held satisfaction. "Every time he uses military authority to cover this search, he digs himself deeper. The paper trail's becoming undeniable." Through his surveillance, James tracked multiple search teams converging on the industrial district. Hayes was coordinating a sophisticated operation, demonstrating just how many corrupt military assets he could call upon. "Found something else," a military aide reported. "Davidson's forge wasn't just producing tactical equipment. The metallurgical specs match weapons we've been moving. He wasn't just watching our operation, he was documenting the modifications." Hayes studied the technical specifications, his understanding of the situation visibly shifting. "He's got everything. Manufacturing processes, serial numbers, modification details, enough to prove we're not just moving weapons, we're altering military hardware." James's hidden cameras captured Hayes's growing realization. The colonel's tactical expertise was now working against him, helping him understand just how thoroughly he'd been compromised. "Status update from the port," Beth reported through secure channels. They're trying to accelerate weapons shipments while maintaining the search. Hayes has them stretched thin. Good, James replied softly. The more pressure they're under, the more mistakes they'll make. Hayes established additional command posts throughout Riverport, each one documented by James's surveillance network. The colonel's attempt to control the situation was exposing more of his operation with every order. Sir, one of Hayes's special operators reported, we've identified Davidson's likely egress routes. Based on his training, he'll use pre-established escape channels. He's not running, Hayes replied, studying the tactical displays. This is his operation. He's watching us right now, documenting everything we do. The colonel's voice carried grudging respect. We thought we were running a sophisticated weapons trafficking operation. Instead, we walked into a federal sting run by someone who specialized in exactly this type of investigation. James monitored Hayes's growing understanding through the surveillance network. The colonel's military experience was helping him grasp the true nature of the trap he'd triggered. Additional units deploying to the north, Cooper reported. Hayes is establishing interlocking coverage of all possible observation points. Let them search, James instructed. Every team he deploys, every order he issues, every military asset he compromises, it all builds the case. Hayes stood in his command center surrounded by tactical displays and communication equipment, unknowingly performing for hidden cameras that documented his increasingly desperate attempts to contain the situation. Davidson's not just gathering evidence against the Steel Serpents, the colonel told his operators. He's documenting an entire network of corruption within military channels. Every time we use official resources to search for him, we prove his case. Through his surveillance, James watched Hayes wrestling with the implications. The colonel's attempt to find one retired Marine was exposing years of criminal infrastructure. Sir, Viper reported, our contacts at Fort Carson are asking questions about the number of military assets deployed to a civilian area. They're requesting direct authorization from command. Use the emergency protocols, Hayes ordered, his voice showing strain. Tell them it's a matter of national security. My authentication codes should prevent any deeper inquiry. Agent Chen's voice carried satisfaction. He's getting sloppy, using military authority to obstruct an investigation. That's another federal charge documented. The hunt continued as darkness fell over Riverport. Hayes's forces maintained their search pattern, each team's movements captured by James's hidden network of cameras and microphones. This isn't just about finding Davidson anymore, Hayes told his operators. We need to contain what he knows. The evidence he's gathered, it goes higher than anyone realizes, all the way to the Pentagon. James watched through his surveillance as Hayes coordinated with more military units, each new deployment revealing additional layers of corruption. The colonel's manhunt had become a desperate attempt to prevent the exposure of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. The night deepened, but Riverport buzzed with activity as Hayes's forces continued their systematic search. The colonel had transformed a simple weapons trafficking operation into a full military exercise, unknowingly providing federal authorities with unprecedented documentation of corruption within military channels. The midnight hour brought no respite to Riverport's industrial district as Hayes's operation shifted into higher gear. The colonel's command center hummed with activity, tactical displays showing search teams methodically tightening their grid pattern. New intelligence from Fort Carson, Hayes's aide reported. They've completed Davidson's background check. Sir, he wasn't just investigating criminal networks. He was specifically targeting weapons trafficking operations using military infrastructure. Hayes studied the classified files, his expression darkening. Every operation he ran followed the same pattern. Establish legitimate cover, gather evidence over months, then trigger a response that forces the targets to expose themselves. Through his surveillance network, James watched Hayes piece together the full scope of the trap he'd walked into. The colonel's military expertise was now revealing just how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Additional units approaching, Beth's voice came through secure channels. Military contractors, private security, Hayes is bringing in everyone he can trust. Agent Chen added, he's burning assets he spent years developing. Each team he calls in gives us more connections to document. Hayes gathered his core team, the workshop's lighting casting harsh shadows across tactical maps and communication equipment. Davidson's not just building a criminal case. He's documenting a conspiracy that reaches through multiple levels of military command. Everyone we contact, every resource we use to find him, just proves his investigation. James tracked increasing activity throughout the port area. Hayes's forces were maintaining their search while trying to accelerate weapons shipments, the dual priorities stretching their resources thin. "Sir," Viper reported urgently, "port authorities demanding explanations for all this military activity. They're threatening to suspend all shipping operations pending federal review." Hayes's response revealed growing desperation. "Use every contact we have. I don't care what it costs. Buy whatever cooperation we need. We can't let Davidson's evidence reach federal authorities." Through hidden microphones, James captured Hayes making calls to increasingly high-ranking military officials. Each conversation exposed new layers of corruption, new connections in what had become a vast criminal enterprise. "Multiple civilian vessels preparing for emergency departure," Mike reported from his observation post near the port. "They're trying to move the weapons before the port authority can inspect them." Cooper's voice carried warning. "Hayes is accelerating everything. He's going to make mistakes." The colonel's tactical displays showed search teams converging on suspected observation points, each movement documented by James's hidden cameras. Hayes was applying textbook counter-surveillance techniques, unknowingly performing for the very system he was trying to detect. "Davidson's done this before," Hayes told his operators, studying operational histories. 5 major cases, all following the same pattern. By the time his targets realized what was happening, he'd already gathered enough evidence to dismantle their entire organization. James watched through his network as Hayes deployed more resources, each team's movements revealing additional aspects of the criminal operation. The colonel's attempt to contain the situation was having the opposite effect. "Sir," a military aide reported with growing concern, "Fort Carson's commanding officer is demanding direct communication. Our emergency protocols aren't satisfying command anymore." Hayes's response was immediate. "Tell them we're dealing with a potential breach of classified weapons systems. That should buy us some time." He turned to his tactical team. "We need to find Davidson now, before this whole thing unravels." Agent Chen's voice held controlled excitement. "He's getting desperate, starting to ignore standard protocols, taking risks we can document." Through his surveillance, James tracked Hayes's growing agitation as the colonel realized the true nature of his situation. Each attempt to contain the investigation only provided more evidence. "Additional teams moving into position," Beth reported. "They're starting building by building searches, using military equipment to scan for surveillance signals." "Let them search," James replied quietly. "The more aggressive they get, the more evidence we gather." Hayes established new command posts throughout the district, each one carefully documented by James's hidden network. The colonel's tactical expertise was becoming a liability, helping him understand just how completely he'd been compromised. "Status update from the port," Viper reported. "Federal agents are starting to arrive. They're coordinating with Port Authority to review all shipping manifests." Hayes's expression hardened. "Move those weapons now, whatever it takes. Use military transport if necessary. My authorization will clear any checkpoints." James's surveillance captured every desperate order, every compromised protocol, every abuse of military authority as Hayes tried to salvage his operation. "Sir," one of the special operators reported, "we've identified probable surveillance positions based on Davidson's previous operations. Request permission to use enhanced interrogation techniques on local businesses' owners." "Approved," Hayes ordered, his desperation showing. "Whatever it takes. Davidson's evidence would expose operations going back years. People at the highest levels of military command would face treason charges." Through his hidden cameras, James watched Hayes cross lines that could never be uncovered. The colonel's attempt to find one retired Marine was dismantling carefully constructed criminal infrastructure that had taken years to build. "Additional federal units arriving," Cooper reported. Hayes's use of military assets in a civilian area is drawing exactly the kind of attention he can't afford. "Perfect," James responded. Let him keep escalating. Every excessive action, every abuse of authority, every compromised asset, it all builds the case. Hayes stood in his command center, surrounded by evidence of his own crimes, unknowingly documenting his desperate attempt to prevent their exposure. The colonel's military experience was helping him understand the trap, but not escape it. Davidson's not just gathering evidence against us, Hayes told his core team. He's documenting systemic corruption within military channels. Every team we deploy, every order we issue, every protocol we break, it all supports his investigation. The night grew deeper, but Riverport buzzed with increasing activity as Hayes committed more resources to his desperate search. The colonel had transformed a local weapons trafficking operation into a massive military exercise, providing federal authorities with unprecedented evidence of corruption at the highest levels. Pre-dawn light crept over Riverport as Hayes's operation began showing signs of strain. The colonel's command center, established in James's workshop, had become a hub of increasingly frantic activity as reports of federal investigation teams arrived from multiple sources. "Sir, we've got a problem," Viper reported urgently. "Fort Carson's commanding general is demanding an immediate explanation for the unauthorized deployment of military assets. Our cover story isn't holding anymore." Hayes hunched over tactical displays, his military bearings showing cracks under mounting pressure. "Use the national security protocols. Tell them we're tracking potential terrorists targeting military shipments." Through his hidden surveillance network, James watched Hayes's desperate attempts to maintain control. Each new order, each compromised protocol, only added to the evidence being gathered. Multiple federal vehicles approaching from the north. Beth's voice came through secure channels. "They're setting up observation posts. DEA, FBI, ATF, all coordinating with Port Authority." Agent Chen added, "Hayes's use of military resources has triggered every red flag in the system. His own protocols are working against him." The colonel paced his command center, issuing rapid-fire orders to increasingly nervous operators. "I want those weapons moved now. Use emergency channels, military transport, whatever it takes. Once the shipments are clear, we can deal with Davidson." James tracked the mounting chaos through his network of cameras and microphones. Hayes's forces were starting to show signs of disorganization, the pressure causing breaks in their carefully maintained facade. "Sir," a military aide reported, "Port authorities suspended all shipping operations pending federal review. They're citing suspicious patterns in military transport requisitions." Hayes's response revealed growing panic. "Override them. Use my emergency authorization codes. Tell them it's a matter of national security requiring immediate action." Through concealed surveillance systems, James captured Hayes making increasingly desperate calls to military contacts. Each conversation exposed new connections, new vulnerabilities in what had seemed an impenetrable criminal network. "Movement at Pier 17, Mike reported from his observation post. "They're trying to load weapons onto civilian vessels. Hayes's people are bypassing port security completely now." Cooper's voice carried grim satisfaction. "He's abandoning protocol entirely. Everything they're doing now is clearly illegal. No way to disguise it as legitimate military operations." The colonel's tactical displays showed his forces spread thin, trying to maintain the search for James while simultaneously moving weapons shipments. Each compromised team provided new evidence for federal investigators. "Davidson planned this perfectly," Hayes told his core team, frustration evident in his voice. "Forced us to react in ways that expose our entire operation. Every attempt to contain the situation just makes it worse." James watched through his network as Hayes's carefully constructed criminal enterprise began crumbling. The colonel's military expertise was now a liability, helping him understand exactly how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. "Sir," another aide reported urgently, "Fort Carson's military police are deploying to Riverport. They're responding to reports of unauthorized use of military assets." Hayes's composure finally cracked. "Lock down everything. No communications in or out except through secure channels. Anyone tries to leave, consider them compromised. Shoot if necessary." Agent Chen's voice held warning. "He's crossing lines he can't uncross. This is moving beyond criminal enterprise into direct treason." Through his surveillance, James tracked increasing signs of breakdown in Hayes' operation. Steel Serpent's members were starting to question orders. Military personnel were showing hesitation about executing clearly illegal commands. Additional federal teams taking position, Beth reported. They're establishing a perimeter around the entire industrial district. Hayes' forces are getting boxed in. Perfect, James replied softly. Let him feel the pressure. The more desperate he gets, the more evidence he provides. Hayes established emergency protocols throughout his command center, each new order carefully documented by James's hidden systems. The colonel's attempt to maintain control was actually accelerating the collapse of his operation. Status report from the port, Viper announced, his usual confidence shaken. Federal agents are inspecting every container, every vessel. They know exactly what to look for. Hayes' response was immediate and damning. Use lethal force if necessary. We cannot allow those weapons to be discovered. Too many people at the highest levels would be exposed. James's surveillance captured every illegal order, every desperate measure, every moment of Hayes' organization unraveling under pressure. Sir, one of the special operators reported, we've got civilian witnesses to military personnel executing unauthorized operations. This can't be contained anymore. Hayes stood in his command center, surrounded by evidence of his crimes, finally understanding the true nature of the trap he'd walked into. Davidson didn't just expose a weapons trafficking operation. He's brought down an entire network of military corruption. Everyone we contacted, every resource we used, every protocol we broke, it's all documented. Through his hidden cameras, James watched Hayes wrestle with the implications of his situation. The colonel's attempted manhunt had actually become the instrument of his own destruction. Multiple units reporting federal contact, Cooper announced. Hayes' people are starting to surrender rather than follow clearly illegal orders. Let them, James responded. The organization's breaking apart exactly as planned. Hayes' desperate attempts to maintain control are actually accelerating the collapse. The colonel made one final attempt to salvage his operation, issuing orders that crossed every legal and ethical line. Each desperate command was captured by James's surveillance, building an ironclad case against not just Hayes, but the entire corrupt military infrastructure he represented. Davidson's not just taking down our operation, Hayes told his remaining loyal operators. He's exposing corruption that goes all the way to the Pentagon. Everyone who helped us, every official who looked the other way, every commander who authorized our shipments, they're all going down. The morning light strengthened, illuminating a river port transformed into a battlefield of evidence and exposure. Hayes' attempt to silence one retired Marine had instead triggered the collapse of a criminal empire years in the making. The morning sun cast harsh light on Hayes' crumbling operation as federal forces tightened their cordon around Riverport's industrial district. Inside the workshop-turned-command center, the colonel's composure had completely shattered. Sir, we've lost contact with Teams 3 and 4, a military aide reported. They've surrendered to federal agents rather than continue unauthorized operations. Hayes slammed his fist on a tactical display, scattering documents. Find Davidson. He's here somewhere watching everything fall apart. This is exactly what he wanted, to force us into exposing our entire network. Through his surveillance system, James watched Hayes' remaining forces begin to fragment. The colonel's desperate orders were causing more harm than good now. Multiple defections reported. Beth's voice came through secure channels. Steel Serpent's members are abandoning their posts. They're realizing Hayes is leading them into federal charges. Agent Chen added, his own people are turning on him. We've got 3 separate Steel Serpent's lieutenants requesting deals in exchange for testimony. The colonel gathered his remaining loyal operators, desperation evident in his rapid movements. We still have one option. If we can find Davidson, eliminate him before he can transmit the evidence. James tracked increasing chaos through his network. Hayes' forces were dividing into factions, some surrendering, some fleeing, while a hardcore group remained loyal to the colonel's increasingly unstable commands. Sir, Viper reported, loyalty warring with self-preservation in his voice. Fort Carson's MP units are deploying with federal authorization. They've got orders to arrest any military personnel operating without proper clearance. Hayes's response crossed the final line. Shoot to kill. Anyone approaching our position is considered hostile. We're beyond legal considerations now. Through concealed microphones, James captured Hayes issuing explicit orders for lethal force against federal agents and military police. Each command further documented the colonel's descent into treason. Movement at all access points, Mike reported from his observation post. Federal teams are coordinating with military police. They're preparing for a final sweep. Cooper's voice carried urgency. Hayes is cornered. That makes him more dangerous. He's got nothing left to lose. The colonel's tactical displays showed his position becoming increasingly isolated. Most of his forces had surrendered or fled, leaving only a small core of fanatically loyal operators. Davidson planned this from the start, Hayes told his remaining men. Used our own protocols against us, forced us to react in ways that exposed everyone involved. The weapons were just bait. He was after bigger prey. James watched through his network as Hayes's last grip on military discipline failed. The colonel began issuing orders that amounted to direct warfare against federal authorities. Sir, one of his few remaining aides reported, we've got confirmation. Davidson's surveillance system captured everything. Every order, every contact, every illegal operation. It's all documented. Hayes's face contorted with fury. Then we burn it all. Destroy the workshop, all evidence, everything. Use incendiary charges. Make it look like an industrial accident. Agent Chen's voice held warning. He's going to try to destroy evidence. We need to move now. Through his surveillance, James tracked Hayes's remaining forces preparing explosives. The colonel had crossed from criminal enterprise into active terrorism. Federal teams in position, Beth reported. They're ready for final approach, waiting for your signal. James studied Hayes's movements through his cameras. The colonel was beyond reasoning now, prepared to destroy everything to cover his crimes. Breach teams ready, Cooper announced. On your mark, Davidson. Hayes stood in the workshop center, surrounded by evidence of his corruption, issuing orders that would end his military career in disgrace. Once the charges are set, eliminate any witnesses. No one can know what really happened here. James activated his workshop's emergency systems. Hidden sprinklers engaged, soaking the area and rendering incendiary devices useless. Backup power systems activated, maintaining surveillance even as Hayes's men tried to cut main power. What the hell? Viper spun around as systems activated unexpectedly. The workshop, it's got some kind of emergency protocols. Hayes's eyes widened with sudden understanding. He's been here the whole time, watching everything, documenting every move. This whole place is one giant surveillance system. Through multiple cameras, James captured the moment Hayes finally grasped the full scope of his defeat. The colonel's military expertise had been turned against him, helping him understand exactly how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. Sir, his last loyal operator reported, federal teams are breaching the perimeter, military police moving in from all directions. Hayes pulled his sidearm, military discipline completely abandoned. Find Davidson. He has to be controlling these systems from somewhere inside the district. James watched the colonel's final breakdown through his network. Hayes was now actively threatening federal agents, ensuring any possibility of leniency would be denied. All teams, execute breach, Cooper ordered. Take them down before Hayes can do any more damage. The workshop erupted in chaos as federal teams breached from multiple directions. Hayes's remaining forces, now numbering barely a dozen, attempted resistance, but found themselves overwhelmed by coordinated federal and military police action. It's over, Colonel, Agent Chen announced through a bullhorn. Your operation is exposed. We have documented evidence of every crime, every connection, every act of corruption. Hayes, cornered and desperate, raised his weapon toward federal agents. Davidson, I know you're watching. Come out and face me. You planned this whole thing, set us up from the start. James activated his workshop's internal speakers, his voice echoing through the space. You're right, Colonel. Every move you made, every order you gave, every protocol you broke, it's all recorded. But you did this to yourself. I just gave you the opportunity to expose your own corruption." The colonel's last grasp on reality seemed to snap. He fired wildly at surveillance cameras, each shot revealing new hidden systems he hadn't detected. "Take him down," Cooper ordered. Federal agents and military police moved with precise coordination, subduing Hayes and his remaining loyal operators with minimal force. As federal teams secured the workshop, James emerged from his hidden command center. Hayes, now in custody, stared at him with a mixture of fury and grudging respect. "You played us perfectly," the colonel said as agents led him away. "Used our own protocols, our own responses, to expose everything." James watched as federal teams began collecting evidence, securing years of documented corruption. "You did it to yourself, Colonel. I just provided the stage." Federal teams swarmed through Riverport's industrial district as dawn gave way to full morning. James's workshop had become the epicenter of a massive evidence-gathering operation, with agents documenting every aspect of Hayes's exposed criminal enterprise. "Initial assessment is staggering," Agent Chen reported, surveying the collected evidence. "We've got documented proof of weapons trafficking operations spanning 5 states, corruption reaching into the highest levels of military command, and international connections we're just beginning to understand." James moved through his workshop, deactivating hidden surveillance systems that had captured every moment of Hayes's downfall. Each camera, each microphone had played its part in documenting a conspiracy years in the making. "Port Authority reports all weapons shipments secured," Cooper announced. "They're finding military hardware that was supposed to be destroyed years ago, all redirected through Hayes's network." Through the workshop's windows, they could see Steel Serpent's members being processed by federal agents. The gang's attempt to establish control over Riverport had instead exposed them as pawns in a much larger criminal operation. "Sir," a federal evidence technician approached with a tablet. "You need to see these numbers. The weapons we've recovered, their serial numbers match inventory that was officially listed as destroyed during combat operations overseas." Agent Chen studied the data. Hayes wasn't just trafficking weapons. He was creating ghost inventory, manipulating military records to hide hardware that was supposed to be decommissioned. James watched as more federal teams arrived, each specialized unit focusing on different aspects of the exposed operation. "How deep does it go?" "Deeper than anyone imagined," Chen replied. Hayes's contacts reach into procurement, logistics, shipping, entire sections of military infrastructure compromised by his operation. Beth arrived with Mike and other members of the community who had helped maintain surveillance. Their small acts of resistance had contributed to documenting Hayes's crimes. "Got more Steel Serpents turning themselves in," Mike reported. "They're all asking for deals, offering information about other operations along the coast." Cooper checked his phone, reading new updates. Similar reports coming in from other jurisdictions. Hayes's arrest has sparked a wave of confessions. Nobody wants to be the last one holding on to secrets. James moved to his forge, now surrounded by federal evidence markers. The simple blacksmith's equipment had masked one of the most sophisticated surveillance operations ever deployed against military corruption. "Your documentation is incredible," Chen noted, reviewing footage from the hidden systems. "Every meeting, every order, every illegal operation, all captured with perfect clarity. Hayes's own attempts to find your surveillance actually exposed more of his operation." Through the workshop's open doors, they could see military police leading away Hayes's former operators. The colonel's loyal forces had been reduced to handcuffed figures being processed for federal custody. "Port Authority has completed their initial inspection," Beth reported. "They're finding weapons hidden in legitimate shipping containers, all authorized by Hayes's command codes." James activated his main security display, showing the full scope of surveillance coverage throughout the district. Every business they targeted, every location they compromised, it all helped document their operation. "Davidson," Chen called out, reviewing new intelligence. "We've got confirmation from Fort Carson. Hayes's commanding officer just requested federal protection. Says he's ready to testify about corruption reaching into the Pentagon." The implications were staggering. Hayes's attempt to silence one retired Marine had instead triggered an investigation that would expose years of systemic corruption. "Multiple jurisdictions requesting our surveillance data," Cooper announced. Hayes's operation apparently connected to criminal enterprises all along the coast. James began transferring secured files to federal servers. Each piece of evidence, each recorded conversation, each documented illegal order would help dismantle not just Hayes's operation, but the entire corrupt network he represented. "Sir," a federal analyst approached with new findings. "The weapons modifications we're discovering, they match international trafficking patterns. Hayes wasn't just supplying domestic criminals." Chen nodded grimly. His network was global, used legitimate military channels to move illegal weapons worldwide. The Steel Serpents were just his local muscle. Through his remaining active cameras, James tracked federal teams securing the industrial district. What had appeared to be a simple gang attempt at territorial expansion had exposed corruption at the highest levels of military command. "More arrests being reported," Beth announced, monitoring police channels. "Hayes's contacts are falling like dominoes. Nobody wants to face federal investigation." Agent Chen reviewed updated intelligence reports. "This is becoming one of the largest military corruption cases in history. Hayes's attempt to contain your surveillance operation actually helped expose everything." James watched as evidence teams cataloged years of criminal activity. His forge had become ground zero for an investigation that would reshape military oversight. "Got word from the U.S. Attorney's Office," Cooper reported. "They're forming a special task force just to handle this case. The evidence you gathered, it's going to take months just to process everything." Through the workshop windows, they could see Hayes being transferred to federal custody. The colonel's military bearing had completely crumbled, replaced by the desperate look of a man who knew he'd lost everything. "You know what really defeated him?" Chen asked, watching Hayes's departure. "Not the surveillance, not the federal teams. It was his own reaction to being discovered. Every move he made to contain the situation just exposed more corruption." James nodded, beginning to power down his hidden systems. He was trained to control every situation, to maintain military discipline. When that training failed him, when he started acting desperately, "He gave us everything we needed," Cooper finished. "Every illegal order, every compromised contact, every abuse of authority, all documented by his own attempts to silence you." The morning continued as federal teams processed evidence and secured suspects. What had started as one retired Marine's stand against local intimidation had exposed a criminal conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of military command. "Sir," a federal agent approached with new intelligence. "We've got reports of similar operations being exposed at other military installations. Hayes's arrest is causing corrupt networks to collapse nationwide." James surveyed his workshop, now transformed into the center of a massive federal investigation. The Steel Serpents had thought they were targeting a simple blacksmith's forge. Instead, they'd exposed corruption that would reshape military oversight for years to come. 3 days after Hayes's arrest, James's workshop had been transformed into a federal command center. Evidence teams worked around the clock, processing years of documented corruption exposed by the colonel's desperate final actions. "Latest numbers from Washington," Agent Chen announced, reviewing secure updates. 28 high-ranking military officers arrested, 15 civilian contractors in custody, and we're just scratching the surface of Hayes's network. James studied the evidence boards now covering his workshop walls. Each connection, each criminal enterprise, had been meticulously documented by his surveillance operation. "Port authorities have completed their initial inventory," Cooper reported. "Over 300 million in illegal weapons recovered, all officially listed as destroyed in overseas operations." Through his remaining active cameras, James tracked continued federal activity throughout Riverport. The industrial district had become the epicenter of an investigation that was reshaping military oversight. "Sir," a federal analyst approached with new findings. "We've identified Hayes's international connections. The weapons weren't just going to domestic criminals. They were being sold to hostile foreign actors." Chen nodded grimly. "Using legitimate military shipping channels to move illegal hardware worldwide. The Steel Serpents were just a small part of a much larger operation." Beth arrived with Mike, bringing updates from their continued surveillance of port activities. "More vessels being impounded. Every container Hayes authorized is being searched. They're finding weapons hidden in official military shipments." James activated his main security display, showing the expanding scope of federal operations. "How far does this go?" "All the way to the top," Chen replied, reviewing new intelligence. Hayes' testimony is exposing corruption throughout the military command structure. Officers, contractors, politicians, everyone who helped facilitate his operation. Through the workshop windows, they could see more federal teams arriving. Each hour brought new revelations, new connections to investigate. "Got confirmation from Fort Carson," Cooper announced. Hayes' commanding officer is cooperating fully. Says the corruption goes back decades. Systematic theft and sale of military hardware. James watched as evidence teams continued processing his surveillance data. Each recorded conversation, each documented illegal order, helped expose more of the criminal network. "Davidson," Chen called out, studying new reports. "Pentagon investigators want access to your complete surveillance archive. The evidence you gathered, it's becoming the foundation for a complete overhaul of military oversight." The implications were staggering. What had begun as a local stand against gang intimidation had exposed corruption that would force fundamental changes in military operations. Multiple jurisdictions reporting similar operations, Beth noted, monitoring law enforcement channels. Hayes' arrest triggered investigations at military bases nationwide. Corrupt networks are collapsing everywhere. Agent Chen reviewed updated intelligence. "This is unprecedented. The level of documented evidence, the scope of corruption exposed, it's going to reshape military security protocols completely." James began transferring more secured files to federal servers. His forge had become the source of evidence that would dismantle criminal enterprises throughout the military system. "Sir," a federal technician reported, "we've decoded Hayes' secure communications. The weapons trafficking, it was just one part of their operation. They were selling military secrets, classified technology." Chen's expression hardened. Treason, pure and simple. Hayes wasn't just corrupting military channels for profit. He was actively working against national security. Through his monitoring systems, James tracked continued arrests throughout Riverport. The Steel Serpent's attempted takeover had exposed corruption far beyond anyone's expectations. "More arrests at Fort Carson," Cooper announced. Hayes' network had compromised entire departments. Military police are finding weapons caches hidden in official storage facilities. Agent Chen studied new intelligence reports. "The pattern's the same at every base we investigate. Corrupt officers, compromised shipping channels, illegal weapons moving through legitimate military infrastructure." James watched federal teams processing years of criminal evidence. His workshop's sophisticated surveillance had documented systematic corruption that had evaded military oversight for decades. "Got word from Washington," Beth reported. "Congressional committees are demanding briefings. The evidence you gathered, it's forcing a complete review of military security procedures." Through the workshop's open doors, they could see more federal resources arriving. What had started as one community's resistance to gang intimidation had exposed corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. "You know what really broke them?" Chen asked, reviewing Hayes' interrogation transcripts. "The completeness of your documentation. Every meeting, every order, every criminal connection, all captured with perfect clarity." James nodded, monitoring continued federal operations. Hayes' military training worked against him. Once he realized he'd been compromised, his desperate attempts to contain the situation just exposed more evidence. "Got updates from other districts," Cooper reported. "Similar weapons trafficking operations being discovered at ports nationwide. Hayes' network had infiltrated the entire military shipping system." The implications continued growing as federal teams uncovered more connections. James's forge had become the center of an investigation that would reshape military security protocols. "Sir," a federal analyst approached with new findings. "We've identified Hayes' financial network. The weapons sales were generating billions in illegal profits, all carefully hidden through military contractors." Chen reviewed the data. Money laundering, weapons trafficking, espionage. Hayes wasn't just running a criminal enterprise. He was undermining national security itself. Through his remaining surveillance systems, James tracked the expanding federal operation. His stand against local intimidation had exposed corruption that would force fundamental changes in military oversight. More Steel Serpents members turning themselves in, Beth announced. They're all offering information about other criminal operations. Nobody wants to face federal investigation. Agent Chen studied updated intelligence. This case is becoming a template for future operations. Your surveillance methods, your documentation procedures, they're going to revolutionize how we investigate military corruption. James watched as federal teams continued processing evidence. His forge had provided the foundation for changes that would affect military operations for years to come. 1 week after Hayes' arrest, the impact of James's operation continued expanding. His workshop had become the nerve center for a nationwide investigation that was fundamentally reshaping military oversight. Latest briefing from Washington, Agent Chen announced, reviewing secure updates. Congressional committees have initiated comprehensive reviews of military procurement, shipping, and inventory systems. Everything Hayes touched is being audited. James studied the evidence timeline now spanning his workshop walls. Each connection his surveillance had documented was leading to more revelations, more arrests. Fort Carson's investigation has expanded, Cooper reported. They're finding weapons caches hidden throughout the base. Hayes' network had completely compromised military storage protocols. Through his remaining surveillance network, James tracked continued federal activity across Riverport. The industrial district's resistance to gang intimidation had exposed corruption that reached far beyond local criminal enterprises. Sir, a federal analyst approached with new intelligence. We've identified Hayes' complete command structure. The corruption wasn't just individual officers. Entire military departments were compromised. Chen nodded grimly. Using legitimate military authority to facilitate criminal operations. Every security protocol, every oversight system, was carefully undermined from within. Beth arrived with Mike, bringing updates from their ongoing monitoring of port activities. Federal teams are still finding weapons. Every container Hayes authorized is revealing more illegal shipments disguised as legitimate military transport. James activated his central display, showing the nationwide scope of federal operations. How much have we exposed? More than anyone imagined possible, Chen replied, reviewing updated reports. Hayes' network had infiltrated military bases across the country. Each investigation is revealing similar patterns of corruption. Through the workshop windows, they could see military investigators arriving from Washington. The evidence James had gathered was forcing a complete reevaluation of military security procedures. Pentagon officials are requesting direct access to your surveillance methods, Cooper announced. Your documentation procedures are becoming the template for new military oversight protocols. James watched as evidence teams continued processing years of recorded criminal activity. His forge had provided the foundation for systematic changes in military operations. Davidson, Chen called out, studying new intelligence. The Joint Chiefs have ordered complete security audits at every major military installation. Your evidence exposed vulnerabilities nobody thought possible. The implications were transforming military operations nationwide. What had started as one community's stand against criminal intimidation had exposed the need for fundamental changes in military oversight. Similar investigations being launched internationally, Beth noted, monitoring intelligence channels. Hayes' network had connections to military corruption worldwide. Every allied force is reviewing their security procedures. Agent Chen reviewed updated briefings. This is unprecedented. The level of documented corruption, the systematic undermining of military security, it's forcing complete restructuring of oversight protocols. James began transferring additional surveillance data to military investigators. His forge's sophisticated monitoring systems had exposed weaknesses that had evaded detection for decades. Sir, a federal technician reported, we've completed analysis of Hayes' communication networks. The corruption wasn't random. It was a carefully planned infiltration of military infrastructure. Chen's expression hardened. They didn't just corrupt the system. They built a parallel structure within it, using legitimate military authority to hide criminal operations. Through his monitoring systems, James tracked continued arrests at military installations nationwide. The Steel Serpent's attempted takeover of Riverport had exposed corruption that threatened national security itself. More officers coming forward, Cooper announced. Hayes' arrest has triggered a wave of confessions. Nobody wants to face federal investigation when the evidence is this comprehensive. Agent Chen studied new intelligence reports. The pattern's becoming clear. They used gang intimidation to establish local control, then exploited that control to facilitate military corruption. James watched federal teams coordinating nationwide operations. His workshop's resistance to local criminals had exposed systematic corruption that had evaded military oversight for years. Updates from Washington, Beth reported. Military procurement procedures are being completely restructured. Your evidence exposed vulnerabilities in every aspect of weapons handling and transport. Through the workshop's open doors, they could see more investigative teams arriving. What had begun as one community's stand against gang intimidation had become the catalyst for fundamental changes in military security. You know what really exposed them? Chen asked, reviewing operation analyses. The completeness of your surveillance, every level of corruption, every compromised system, every criminal connection, all documented with perfect clarity. James nodded, monitoring continued federal operations. They never understood what they were really fighting, thought they were just dealing with local resistance to gang activity. Got word from other military bases, Cooper reported. Similar weapons trafficking operations being shut down nationwide. Hayes' network had established identical systems at multiple installations. The implications continued growing as federal teams uncovered more connections. James's forge had become the source of evidence that would reshape military security protocols completely. Sir, a federal analyst approached with new findings. We've mapped Hayes' entire criminal infrastructure. The corruption wasn't just about weapons. They'd compromised every aspect of military operations. Chen reviewed the data. Using legitimate military authority to facilitate criminal enterprises, every security system, every oversight protocol, was carefully subverted from within. Through his remaining surveillance systems, James tracked the expanding impact of his operation. His stand against local intimidation had exposed corruption that would force fundamental changes in military operations worldwide. More military contractors surrendering to federal authorities? Beth announced. They're all offering evidence about other compromised operations. The whole corrupt system is unraveling. Agent Chen studied updated intelligence. Your operation is becoming the model for future investigations. The surveillance methods, the documentation procedures, they're revolutionizing how we approach military corruption. James watched as federal teams continued processing evidence that would reshape military oversight for years to come. His forge had provided the foundation for changes that would protect against systematic corruption in the future. 2 weeks after Hayes' arrest, James stood in his restored workshop, the rhythmic ping of hammer on metal once again filling the space. The Federal Command Center had been dismantled, but the impact of his operation continued reverberating through military channels worldwide. Final numbers from Washington, Agent Chen reported, delivering her last official briefing. 73 high-ranking military officers arrested, 42 civilian contractors indicted, over $2 billion in illegal weapons recovered. And that's just the beginning. James set down his hammer, studying the workshop that had helped expose systematic military corruption. How many Steel Serpents members in custody? 312 nationwide, Cooper answered, reviewing final reports. Every chapter that helped facilitate Hayes' operation. Most of them are cooperating with federal investigators. Through the workshop windows, they could see Riverport's industrial district returning to normal operations. The community's unified resistance to gang intimidation had exposed corruption far beyond anyone's expectations. Sir, a federal analyst approached with final intelligence updates. Congress has approved comprehensive reforms of military oversight. Your surveillance methods are being incorporated into new security protocols. Chen nodded with satisfaction. What started as local resistance to gang activity has completely transformed how we approach military corruption. Every base, every procurement system, every shipping channel is being restructured. Beth arrived with Mike, bringing news from the restored port operations. Federal teams have completed their final sweeps. Every trace of Hayes' network has been eliminated from shipping channels. James activated his workshop's regular security systems, the sophisticated surveillance network now serving as a model for military oversight. How many similar operations have been exposed? 17 major military installations, Chen replied, checking final reports. Each one following Hayes' pattern, using gang intimidation to establish local control, then exploiting that control to facilitate weapons trafficking. Through the restored workshop, they could see Riverport thriving. The community's stand against criminal intimidation had not only protected their district, but had exposed corruption that threatened national security. Pentagon briefing this morning, Cooper announced. They're implementing your documentation procedures across all military operations. Your forge showed them vulnerabilities they never knew existed. James watched as the last federal teams departed. His workshop had returned to its dual role, a legitimate blacksmith's forge that also produced specialized tactical equipment for military units. Davidson, Chen called out, reviewing her final intelligence summary. What you established here, it's going to protect military operations for years to come. Nobody will be able to build another network like Hayes'. The impact had transformed military security worldwide. What began as one community's resistance to gang intimidation had exposed the need for fundamental changes in military oversight. Similar reforms being adopted internationally, Beth noted, monitoring final updates. Every allied force is restructuring their security protocols based on what we uncovered here. Agent Chen prepared to depart for her next assignment. This case will be studied for years, not just the exposure of corruption, but how a community's resistance to local criminals revealed systematic weaknesses in military security. James returned to his forge, the familiar work masking the sophisticated security systems that had documented years of criminal activity. Sometimes the best way to expose corruption is to let it think it's winning. That's what really destroyed them, Cooper observed. Hayes thought he was dealing with simple local resistance, never understood he was actually exposing his entire criminal empire. Through his workshop's open doors, they could see new life in Riverport's industrial district. The community had emerged stronger, more unified, their resistance to intimidation protecting not just their district, but military security itself. Final reports from Washington, Beth announced. Every aspect of military procurement and shipping is being redesigned. Your operation exposed vulnerabilities nobody thought possible. James worked his forge, each strike of his hammer echoing through a workshop that had helped reshape military security. They thought they were targeting a simple blacksmith's forge. Instead, they exposed corruption that reached into the Pentagon itself. Chen finished. Your stand against local intimidation forced changes that will protect military operations for generations. Through his regular security feeds, James watched Riverport returning to normal operations. The Steel Serpent's attempt to establish criminal control had instead exposed corruption that threatened national security. You know what really changed things? Cooper asked, preparing to return to regular law enforcement duties. Not just the evidence you gathered, but how the community stood together. Showed that resistance to intimidation can expose corruption at the highest levels. James nodded, continuing his work at the forge. Every criminal empire has weaknesses. Sometimes it just takes standing your ground to make them expose themselves. The day continued as Riverport embraced its new normal. The industrial district had become a symbol of how local resistance to criminal intimidation could protect not just a community, but national security itself. One last thing, Chen said, pausing at the workshop door. Hayes finally admitted it in federal custody. Said he never understood what he was really fighting. Thought he was just dealing with a stubborn blacksmith. James smiled slightly, watching his community thrive. Sometimes the best weapon against corruption isn't the blade you forge, it's the anvil that helps shape justice. The hammer's rhythm filled the workshop once more, a simple blacksmith's forge that had helped expose and eliminate systematic military corruption. The Steel Serpents had thought they were targeting an easy mark. Instead, they'd revealed weaknesses that would reshape military security for years to come. In the end, they'd learned the hard way. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who fights back immediately, but the one who knows exactly when to strike. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.